As I introduce her, Ntombi is such a curious spiritual soul on this human life safari. She's a mother, a wife, a friend and a fellow African committed to the advancement of the continent and all of its people. She's a leader, a womanist, and a humanist that is passionate about the plight of all in society, with a special focus on the women and youth challenges. Ntombi has followed the BK practices for almost 10 years now and continues to be a committed member of our BK Johannesburg community. Her life philosophy is that Mother Teresa called the practice of courage, which is all about doing small things with love. And in typical Mother Teresa style, she said, if you smile at somebody, you express love to them. So please welcome Ntombi with your smiles.
I will start, and you've said a number of things, Sister Janti, and I've been taking notes. I think I have like over, 10 pages of just small notes here, just scribbling over what you stated. But I think I would like to just go into some of the concepts that you spoke about and probably present them in a more South African context, or sometimes maybe what people in the audience are probably grappling with currently with this notion of spirituality. And I'll start, in the complex space where we find ourselves as South Africa today, which is we find ourselves in a country, and you've highlighted this as a global phenomena, where the country itself is under so much strain, in terms of having lost its balance. And South Africa is a country where balance is quite a foreign terrain. We are a country of huge inequalities and a country of huge pain and a very, very, painful history. When we speak about spirituality in a country like South Africa, how do we move the personal into the public space? How do we take this energy that I am able to have self-mastery, to have self-awareness, to direct myself? How do we then start to influence a space that to many would seem like a very toxic space and might seem like a helpless space where people feel paralysis? So how do I start to see myself as an active agent in, addressing or being part of the change in a country that is so almost brutal or challenging beyond, human comprehension?
When I came here in '82, I saw the situation and I saw it becoming more and more toxic and brutal through the period that I kept coming back. And in '94, just prior to the first democratic elections, there was a big concern in the country. Would there be smooth, peaceful elections, or would it be something very violent? Mm-hmm. And it could have gone either way. Yeah. But what happened was that I think groups formed around the country and they started to pray. And the power of prayer and meditation is, in a sense, the highest form of silent prayer and communication with the divine. The power of prayer seemed to gather force because one of the beautiful things about this country is that most people do believe in God and do have some type of awareness and relationship with God. And what we found was that the elections went very, very smoothly. And I believe that you can attribute that to the power of prayer of the vast majority of people who were here at that time. But it was quite a marked difference between a little while earlier when there had been the concerns and even a little bit of violence breaking out just prior to the elections, and then the night before the elections, people really coming together in communities for prayer. And why I say this is because whatever is the situation, I believe that the power of the mind, the power of the spirit, the power of prayer can make a difference to that. And so as an individual, if I as an individual today come back to the awareness of my own state of inner dignity and self-respect, this is what I instill within my family all around me. And it's been found by research that where there's a household, where there's faith, the children in that household grow up with greater self-respect than if it wasn't that act of faith or that atmosphere of faith. And so it's a major factor that can make a big difference. And so if you have a child growing up with dignity and self-respect, then the clarity of that individual is such that he'll make his way in society with that awareness and understanding without being pushed down. And yes, I understand that the systems are really loaded against the majority here, but that's also true in most other countries, you know. India, definitely, it's also true. But if I can make a difference in my own life, I can start helping others around me make a difference too. And so I think that we should never underestimate the power of prayer, the power of faith, and the power of the human spirit when we have that awareness.
And in your opinion, just following on what you just said, South Africa, for example, in the past few months, has had a huge scourge of attacks on women and children, where the innocent are continuously, violently, treated, killed, and so forth. How do you explain spirituality in a context where bad things happen to good people? How do we start these conversations? For example, I grew up in a township where now I'm seeing child-headed households where there is no adult. You have just children. There is no guidance. There isn't even a platform for that, spiritual guidance sometimes. So how do we practically put this into actions where, the ground doesn't seem as fertile, to actualize such?
You've mentioned a number of different issues.
Yes.
And so the first one about domestic violence.
Yes.
And that really is rampant across the world. And in some countries, it's always been there. I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's been there. But it's now being talked about more. It's now more open. And so people are willing to see what's happening in a bigger way than they were before. And so that's part of the movement towards transparency, in a sense. I understand the brutality, but it's also that we're now understanding that this is what's going on, whereas before we would ignore it or we would hide it, we wouldn't acknowledge it. And I see that the power of women is the power of the spirit. It's not physical power. Women don't have as much physical power as men. That's usually the norm. How is it that I can become more powerful? It's through my own awareness and my connection with the divine. There's a very lovely word that's used, and it's used more in the context of the female rather than the male. And it's this word, Shakti, power. And it's the power of the spirit. And so women, in a very natural way, have a tendency to be more spiritual within their life generally. Here we have a good balance of male and female today, but within a gathering that's a very spiritual gathering, very often you see it's more 60% or even 70% women sometimes, even in churches and temples and so on. And so women have this predisposition to spirituality in which they can make that connection much more easily and draw that power within themselves and develop this inner power that gives them a protection which physical power can't give, and a power which anything external isn't able to give. And so I see that the power of the Spirit is such that if I'm in an abusive relationship, I'll have the courage to make a decision, to make a move. Either have a conversation, and if I know that a conversation isn't going to work, be able to make a move. But I need that inner power and courage to be able to come to that understanding. If I allow myself to be trapped by my attachments or my desires, then I stay a victim. But spirituality gives me the understanding to make a decision, which may seem difficult at first, but gives me the possibility of bringing about transformation in my own life and being responsible for where I'm going and what I'm doing.
In the state of the world currently, and I just want to touch on courage, do you think every human being has this courage? And what happens in an environment where there's a cost to courage? That is, if I become courageous, it might probably harm my own body. If I speak up, for example, against the state, and I don't remain silent, there might be severe consequences for me. How do we navigate courage, and especially in this spiritual context, in a manner that yields, positivity, not just for the self, but in the broader spectrum?
I think the first and foremost is to just come to that deeper and deeper understanding of who I am, and to know that I am spirit and not matter. And in that awareness of spirit, to draw the power that can come from above. And courage is different to being foolhardy. And so I'm not going to stand there in the firing line and say, come shoot at me. But I'm going to have the wisdom to know what steps I need to take to be able to make a difference in my situation. Courage means to say that I don't need to depend on somebody around me. I will be able to earn my own living, even if I don't have an education. There are skills that I have, there are skills that I can develop. I can earn my living with honesty, but I need to be able to be free and stand on my own feet. I think that inner spirituality, and this is something I'm talking about in terms of practical examples and situations in women I've seen. I'll give you one real story. This is a woman in the 50s, and I was 8 years old at the time, and I didn't know her background, I didn't know her story. I understood her story later on in the 60s. She had been widowed, and within the cultural context of India, a widow really has no rights. She hadn't been educated, she was actually illiterate. She had 2 little sons. She had started to meditate just before her husband died. And the family said, it's okay, we look after you. And something within her made her understand, her spirituality made her understand that if she agreed to having the care from the family, what would happen is that she would be enslaved to them. She would just have to follow orders, and maybe she would be able to continue to go to the center for meditation. Maybe they'd say, no, you need to be here at home to cook breakfast for all of us. She was sort of, not in a very conscious way, but in a sort of unconscious way, aware of the repercussions. She started to cook and got her 2 little boys to sit by the roadside and sell the things she had cooked. And it became a little business. And with that money, she was able to manage to educate her 2 little boys. They gradually grew up. She became more and more skilled. Word spread around. More and more people would come to her. And by the time the eldest son was 15, a few years later, he started to work. And he was able to bring in an income. And she managed her life with calmness, with courage, with peace, with clarity, knowing that her freedom to practice her meditation and her spirituality was going to take care of her rather than say, I'm going to stay with you. And so, similar situations, this is why I say that if I decide I want to take that power and I want to continue to take that power is something that can guide me. That power is something that will be giving me the intuition to know which direction to take my life in. I believe that guidance is available to all of us, and sometimes we switch off that mechanism and we only allow this sound and opinion of human voices to influence us, or we allow our own fears and weaknesses to influence us. Take a step up and you can have access to truth and wisdom which is unparalleled, and that can take you in the right direction.
Interesting. Earlier on, you spoke about, you asked who are believers and who are non-believers in the room, and you said you're not going to ask who's a believer and who's a non-believer. How does this message, because I feel in a room like this, the people who are already here are kind of like almost converted. We kind of like are in the same vibration of, or this message and how we practice it in our lives and so forth. But how do you deal with completely different points of views that sometimes maybe even reject, the spirituality, where people don't believe, where people don't want to listen, where people don't want to be influenced, where people probably even go to the extent of believing in evil? How do we become a force of positive change in the space of complete opposition and not even being willing to to hear this message? Or sometimes you get people who say, I don't want to be good. Why are you getting me into the space of being good? So how do we take this in an environment that is not conducive for us completely?
At the end of the day, I have to live with myself, and I have to be true to my own conscience. And so, am I going to allow those who believe that evil is the way to influence me and start following them? Will I be able to live with myself if I do that? I don't think I would. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to join them. Mm-hmm. If they don't want to join me, that's also fine.
Okay, then we end up with a polarized world.
I really think that I have to do what I need to do.
Okay.
I'll share another story. It's a jungle story. And the story is about a fire in the jungle. And the fire was big. It was coming across huge. And the big animals crossed over to the other side of the water, of the river, to go to safety. And they thought that, okay, well, at least we are protected. And the fire continued to rage. And this little bird was flying past and saw the scene and decided to go down to the water in the river, take up a few drops and fly to the fire and drop those few drops. And the bird did this tirelessly any number of times. And the big animals looked at each other and said, oh, what's the point? This isn't going to make any difference. But the bird continued with the thought that I have to do what I have to do. Mm-hmm. And just by then, an angel happened to be going past and sent a cloud of rain, and the rain came and the fire was put out. And so, believe the story?
I think so.
Whether I believe it or I don't, you can see that I have to be true to myself and do what I know I have to do. And at that moment when you're doing that, it's not even seen as courage. At least you don't feel that I'm doing something very courageous. I'm just doing what I know I have to do. I have to get on with it. And then what will happen is that those who oppose will find their own way, and those who are like-minded will be drawn. How did the Brahma Kumaris come to the point of X millions functioning in 120 countries? Mm-hmm. It was a handful of people And out of that, it was 95% women, 5% men at that time, 300, a community of 300, and I think only one of them had a university degree. None of the rest even had matriculation, and they stayed for 14 years together in circumstances that were quite challenging. It was the World War going on, it was the Partition War going on, and they stayed within a situation that was quite horrific. But things were fine, they were protected by the power of the divine. This is all a real story. And they then moved to India just before the dictatorship started in Pakistan. And then when these women who had been experimenting with these ideas in the laboratory of their own mind came to Abu after a year of being together in meditation in Mount Abu, they then went out to the cities of India, the towns, the villages, the cities, and groups began to form around them. And there was a huge amount of opposition because it was a women's-led organization. Women weren't supposed to be teachers, women were supposed to be followers. Even today, mostly, it's men who are the gurus, men who are the teachers, and women are the followers. But this was something different, something new. The ideas they were sharing were new. And so there were many challenges, but they just did what they had to do. And people who were touched by these teachings and felt the truth in the teachings gravitated towards them. And here we are. And what happened to the opposition? It went flying away somewhere, I don't know where. And the work continues. If you have a commitment and you're true to that commitment, you just keep moving forward and the energy grows.
Maybe speak a bit to, we spoke about, you spoke about courage, and there was a touch on resilience, and I hear the message of hope, but how do we practice patience in that mix? Because I speak for myself, I want to see change in my lifetime. Is it really necessary to whatever goodness I am working on within myself and influencing the space around me and influencing the community around me and the country that I live in? Do I have to see that change in my lifetime, or patience means something else? It means just going on and understanding that the pure energy will continue to to propel itself into abundance.
In my lifetime, I've seen things change that I didn't expect to change. I've seen people accept vegetarian diet as being quite normal. And earlier times, it used to be very strange. If you're a vegetarian, I remember at school being the only vegetarian in the school, and all they could find for me was boiled potatoes and a few bits of carrot and lettuce. That's it. That was what they could find. Yes. Today, it's very different. How long has it been since the no smoking rule came in public places? Not so long ago. In Britain, once the law was introduced, people thought, people are going to react to this. But within the space of a year, no smoking in public places, and it had become accepted. And I remember traveling on planes where, even though you were in the no smoking section, there was smoke coming to you from other places, and it was absolutely awful. I've seen holistic health come on the scene, where instead of just everybody believing the prescription and thinking that it's the pharmacy, it's the doctor that's going to give me the remedy, understanding that there can be a different way of taking care of my health, of understanding how to use the power of my mind to take care of my health. So I've seen holistic medicine come into play. I've seen the difference between the gender. Yes, there's still a glass ceiling, but at the time that I was applying for university, in medical school in London, they only had 20 places for girls. In 1967, so that's not like a century ago, it's half a century ago almost, but that was the situation. That's changed. So many things that we believed would take forever, things are changing. The environment in 1964, I think, was the first book, The Silent Spring by Rachel Carson's. And it was very quiet. You know, being green was a very, very far cry from the establishment. And today we have multinational companies who are proclaiming, whether rightly or wrongly, falsely or really, that we are green and, you know, buy our products, they are green products. So it changed from being on the fringe to being mainstream in my lifetime. And so I've seen all these changes happen in my lifetime. Meditation. Who spoke about meditation 40 years ago? And today, meditation's part of the vocabulary. Mindfulness 20 years ago, nobody would have talked about it. So patience is patience with myself, in which I think, of course I can get rid of my ego. Of course I can get and of course the very fact that I'm saying of course, and that's my ego speaking. And it's a slow process, getting rid of my ego, getting rid of my anger. So I need a lot of patience with myself. Then I'll have patience with you and keep having good wishes for you and hope for you. But in terms of society, I've seen a lot of change happen very, very quickly. Relatively quickly, actually.
So it's powerful, because the consistent message that you keep on, you know, communicating is that it's all with you. It starts with you. It's the job, the journey, the safari is all you. And if you are right, then the influence is inevitable in society.
And I'd also like to just add that it's, yes, what I can do, but that power comes from
Connection.
above.
Yes. Thank you so much.